Hello, everyone. This is the 88th episode of the Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles and the Soccer Nostalgia blog, and I am joined by Paul from Shipley in England and the 1888 Letter blog. For this episode, we interview Peruvian journalist Mr. Daniel Arce as we discuss the Peru National Team during the 1970 World Cup. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you, Shahan. Thank you, Paul, for having me. It's a pleasure to talk with you guys today.
Thank you for joining us, Daniel. Can you just introduce yourself and tell us about your history with football?
For sure. I'm Daniel Arce, just like Shahan introduced me earlier. I am a journalist, even though I'm not close to sports journalism at the moment. When I started during my college days, I used to work for this only football radio called Ovación, which is a Lima-based radio here in the capital of Peru. So we mainly covered the local professional league, also European competitions, as well as Copa America. So what I mainly did there was to interview players, interview the club's personnel, such as coaches, such as physical, mainly all kind of personnel when it comes to the when it comes to clubs or when it comes to football associations. Just like I told you guys, I also covered Copa America, um, a major tournament in CONMEBOL, the South American association. And that's, let's say that I got in touch with soccer since I was a little kid, because I've I've grew up in a soccer home, if you want to call it that way. My father's been a fan, my grandparents as well. They've lived through the golden era, if you want to call it that way, of the Peruvian national team, and that's mainly the background. That's mainly where I come from.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can you describe the state of the affairs in Peruvian football in the late 1960s into the year 1970?
Yeah, for sure. There was a massive time where Peru didn't made it through the World Cup, and the Peruvian Football Association tried to improve, tried to change that, and that's why they had a vast portfolio of options to choose for the national team coach. They were thinking of an European profile. They were interested in also a Soviet coaches, because they were very good at by that time. But they made a decision to pick Waldir Pereira, Didi. If you remember him, he used to share team with Pelé back in Sweden 58 and Chile 62 as a soccer player. He also had some time at Real Madrid as his latest years of of playing career. Um, but after all that brilliant time playing football, he became at year 66, he decided to retire after a successful career. And in the year 67, just 1 year later, he came to Peru to train Sporting Cristal, one of the three biggest clubs in our local league. A year later, he became a champion with this team, and that's why all the highlights were upon him, and he was offered to train the national team, and even eventually he accepted the national team, and he picked Peruvian Roberto Drago, another former national team player, as his assistant.
Was he a popular choice as manager? Were the press in favour of him being appointed?
At the beginning, they didn't, because he had no experience at all when it comes to national teams. Remember that he retired as a professional soccer player in the 66, 67. 1 year later, with no experience, he came to Peru to train at Sporting Cristal. And if you think about it, he only has experience of 1 year, as a trainer, no background at all, no under 17s, no under 20s when it comes to national association. And despite the lack of experience, the FPF, the Peruvian Football Federation, decided of his profile to take charge of the Peruvian national team. The start wasn't very well. They had 9 friendlies before the process of the qualification for the World Cup. Of those 9 games, 4 were draws, 4 were ties, and 5 defeats, not a single win. And that's why the press wasn't seeing him with good eyes, as long as the public opinion. They were saying, hey, we don't have someone with experience. What could we expect when it comes to the qualification for the 1970 World Cup?
In the process of researching for this topic, I learned that Didi was given full powers in terms of a manager, but not a contract, not a formal contract, but did receive financial guarantees following qualification. And upon taking over, his force of personality was praised, as he stated his confidence that Peru would qualify, and he described his players as ambitious and physically strong. And he continuously stated that he never doubted qualifications because of the qualities of his players. Regarding the qualifiers for this 1970 World Cup, Peru were in a group with Argentina and Bolivia. And naturally, Argentina would have been seen as the favorites. Can you describe these qualifiers?
Yeah, they by that time they were different qualifiers as we see now in CONMEBOL, right? It wasn't a system all versus all. It was no knockout stage at all. They were divided in groups of 3. So just as you said, Shahan, Peru was in this pot, in this group, with Bolivia and Argentina. And before even starting, all the media and all the public opinion had no doubt at all that Argentina would be in the top of that chart. It wasn't that way. you know it actually, just like I said, there were three teams: Bolivia, Argentina, and Peru. And at the first game, Peru against Argentina, it was played in Estadio Nacional de Lima, which is our biggest and main and principal soccer field here in Peru. And it was a victory for Peru, 1-0. And the second game, it was against Bolivia, in Bolivia, which is actually a very difficult scenario, because they have a lot of altitude, and the players are actually they used to play in that kind of geography. And it was harder for Peruvian players, because some of them played outside, and mainly all of them played here in Lima, the capital, which is 0 meters above the sea, right? So we lost that game 2-1. Then we played here again in Lima against Bolivia. It was a very bright game for the Peruvian side. They win 3-0, 3-0. And the final game was in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, which was the definite a game that was very important for Peru to reach the World Cup. That was a draw. That was a 2-2 for Peru and Argentina. And as you said, Shahan, if I may, when it comes to Waldir Pereira Didi, the coach, um, there was a big barrier between the coach, the players, and the press, which was the language, because he speaks Portuguese as a Brazil native, and in Peru the main language is Spanish. So even though it's a little bit confusing for them to communicate, just like you said, he was very confident of his players. He used to draw a 4-2-4 system, very offensive. Whatever he was playing, no matter if it was a local game or it was a game outside, his system and his idea of game didn't change at all, no matter which rival he had in front of him.
And let's remind everyone that the qualification phase was actually, it took place during the month of August. So all the matches were within the month of August, and it was said that even the Argentine press praised Peru's quality, and there was no complaints of cheating or anything like that. They realized that Peru had qualified on the field and with merit.
Oh yeah, yeah, totally. I recall having viewing these interviews with former Argentine players in that time. Alfio Basile, captain of the Argentina team, a defender, and Roberto Perfumo, and they praised Peru. They said they made a great game, a very smart tactic from the coach line, and yeah, we're talking about Argentina, nothing less. Outside of a World Cup, considering they had brilliant players at that time, it was a shock. It was a shock not only in Argentina but as long as in Peru as well.
You mentioned the team's tactics. Did he make other changes to the way the team was organised and how they trained to help them through these qualifiers?
I know that they had a double turn of trainings during the day, and that was very revolutionary at the time because the players used to just train one or in morning or in the afternoon. But he decided to have a double training per day. Let's clarify that at that time they didn't have much of a deal with the players because all of the squad was playing here in Peru. We didn't have players overseas in elite leagues, not in Europe, not in Brazil, not in Argentina. So I think that's even that's more remarkable because he had a human group of local players. So he, in some matter, tried to this collective talent to make it work, and bet you guys can bet he did.
Let's remind everyone that this was Peru's first ever qualification since the inaugural 1930 World Cup. So how was this event, this qualification, regarded at the time?
Well, it was a fresh breath, if you want to call it that way, for the press, for the public opinion, for the football fans here, because as you said, it was, come on, 4 decades of not making it through the World Cup, and we had brilliant players. We had some players that used to play outside and had their final years here in Peru, such as Alberto Gallardo or Osvaldo Ramirez, and other players that were in the process of making them, having them on the spotlight, such as young Teófilo Cubillas. It was his first qualifying process, and at the end, his first World Cup. So there was a lot of hype. And all the spotlights were in the Peru team. I can only see myself at that time as a football fan I mean, your country hasn't made it to the World Cup in 40 years, and you're actually qualifying, taking Argentina away, taking Chile away, taking Colombia, Ecuador, other power, and very, very, very decent national teams. And at the end, it was Brazil, Uruguay, and Peru who made it to the World Cup 1970.
Ahead of this World Cup, the one player that seemed to get the most of the acclaim from outside of Peru was the captain and central defender Hector Chumpitas, considered one of the best in South America. Can you describe him and his career at this point in time?
Of course, Hector Chumpitas is considered one of the best defenders in the history of South American football. He's not from Lima. He's from this small town called Cañete in reaching Ica, which is another region right in the border with Lima. He started playing amateur football in 1963. 1964 and 1965, he went through Deportivo Municipal, so he moved from his family in that little town of Cañete here to Lima, and he did mostly all of his career in Universitario de Deportes, which is one of the three biggest clubs in here. So but by that time, in the 1970 qualifiers, he was considered one of the best players of this qualifying tournament. And something that is very curious about Hector Chumpitas is that despite of him being a central defender, a right back, he could use both legs, both profiles. He wasn't very tall. He was a meter 75. So, considering his position, his height wasn't at all a deal for him. He was a very smart player, and he was the captain. He was the leader, and the coach Didi was depending on him for a lot of temper and a lot of initiative and leadership in the field.
Now we come to the year 1970, and let's discuss Peru's World Cup preparation process and the many friendlies that were played in these first 3 months of the year. Going through Peru's preparation friendlies. So we have to start off by saying that there was progressive adaptation to altitude with the stage at Ica, which is 800 meters above sea level, and then at Arequipa, which is 2,400 meters above sea level. And then after that, they played a series of friendlies, and then they traveled to Mexico for more friendlies. So it was like 4 months of preparations. So as far as the matches, in January, we have matches against Dinamo Zagreb. It was like a 2-2 tie and a 2-1 win for Peru. Then 2 matches against Spartak Trnava, a Czech side. So there was like a 3-2 win and a 1-1 tie. In February, there are more matches. So in the beginning of the month, there are matches against a Czechoslovakia 11 side, not the main national team. So it was a 2-0 loss and then a 2-1 win for Peru. The first actual national team Peru met was on February 9th. They tied with Romania. So then there's a few days later, there's a match against Polish side, Gornik Zabrze. That was a 2-2 tie. A couple of days later, against the Soviet Union, it was a scoreless tie. And then a few days later, they lost against the Soviets 2-0. All this is still in February. Then near the end of the month, they actually had a friendly against their World Cup opponents, Bulgaria. So the first match, Peru lost 3-1. The second match, they won 5-3. So now we come to March, and Peru faces the World Cup hosts 4 times. So the first match, 2 matches at home, Peru loses 1-0 and then win 1-0. Then they travel to Mexico and they lose 3-1 and they tie 3-3. At the end of the month, They travel to Uruguay and lose 2-0. So now we come to April. On April, Peru defeats Uruguay 4-2. Then they defeat El Salvador 3-0. And finally, they have two matches against Brazilian side Internacional Porto Alegre. So they win the first game 2-0. They lose the second game 2-0. So these preparation friendlies were not particularly impressive. So there was some worry about how Peru would do during the World Cup. And in fact, the West German manager, Helmut Schoen, had observed the Mexico Peru matches and he felt confident and called Peru a weak team. However, he changed his opinion after watching them in Leon again against Mexico again and said that he had seen the true Peru this time. So at this point, there's still an unknown quantity as far as the rest of the world. Just to mention that Joao Havelange, who at this time was the Brazil Federation president, he said that as much as 5 of the Peru players would have had their place in the Brazilian side, which is a bold statement. But in general, how were this friendly preparation process seen at the time?
Well, it was quite of a process. You just mentioned each of them, different scores. I guess by that time it was a little bit worrying for the coach. Some of them were scoreless draws. Some of them were big defeats, such as Czechoslovakia by that time, the Czech Republic, here in Lima, 2-0, and the other game against them was 2-1. There were goals by Hugo Sotil and the young Teófilo Cubillas. But one of the most exciting games from what I've read and what I've heard was the draw against Romania, the 1-1. There was a goal from Teófilo Cubillas. There were two games as well with the Soviet Union, a goalless draw and a 2-0 defeat. Another defeat from from Bulgaria, here in Peru. And about that game against Bulgaria, which was the 21st of February 1970, I wanted to appoint something that Didi, the coach, sent to the field a different team. And let me explain this. He went with Otorino Sartor, who was the substitute goalkeeper. He drew a line of three defenders, and that was new for Peru. So it was the first time that he had a lineup of three defenders. It was with Gonzalez, Fernandez, and Risco, and he had 5 midfielders. It was Segarra and Gonzalez as at central midfielders, Castañeda, Rojas, Oliva, and Sotil as the attacking midfielders, if you might call it, and only one forward, which was Osvaldo Ramirez. This was clearly a simulation. He wanted maybe to try new systems, but eventually it didn't work out because he lost against Bulgaria 3-1. But let's talk about the match just 3 days later. He completely changed the team. He went with Correa, which was the third goalkeeper, another substitute, and this time he actually played with a 4-3-3 formation. He went with De La Torre on the right back, Salinas and Héctor Chumpitas as central defenders, Eloy Campos on the left side, Cruzado, Chale, and Cubillas in the middle, and Gallardo, León, and Bailón as the three forwards. This was, let's say, the system that mostly adequated to Didi, the coach. When it comes to the World Cup, he was thinking of actually playing like this with a 4-3-3 formation. and it was very positive because Peru won 5-3 against Bulgaria. And I wanted to have this contrast, these two different systems that at the end they were friendlies. They were matches that no matter what the results were, he was testing new players, testing new systems. So I think the friendlies, despite of the results, were very positive because they gave the coach an idea of playing, which players can make it to the World Cup, which ones are going to stay home. So I think that, as I said, despite of the results, I think these friendly matches were at the end positive for the national side.
Now, it seems that DD actually had a different plan for these preparations. Can you discuss the proposals to tour Europe, both in 1969 and 1970, that were refused by the Peruvian Federation?
Well, let me say that they remain a mystery to these days. Some of them call it probably a budget issue. Also, that Didi was very keen on touring Europe for preparing to the World Cup, but the negative side was on the National Association. It was mainly budget. From what I've read, from what I've heard, it was mainly a budget issue, but that didn't stop Peru for facing European teams such as the Soviet Union, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Bulgaria. So at the end, they had the games, but of course, they couldn't make it to Europe to have proper preparation matches.
To give it more context, in 1969, the Federation said that it would be useless and too expensive to travel to Europe. And later, they actually agreed, but then the World Cup qualifiers in Europe had already ended, and Didi felt that his presence was more important in Peru. So he also wanted a tour like in 1970. And again, the federation could not afford. The National Sports Committee refused his request. And initially, the plan was to have friendly matches against Elche in Spain, against Barcelona, against the Switzerland national team, against AC Milan, against East Germany, against France, and against Anderlecht. And but this tour was scrapped. But they nevertheless they played many matches to get match practice and be ready for the World Cup. Let's discuss some of Peru's better known players. Can you start with Teofilo Cubillas, perhaps the greatest Peruvian footballer ever? How was his evolution at this point?
Well, let's mention that Teófilo Cubillas, by that time, he was only 21 years old. He was one of the youngest players in the squad. He made his debut at the 66 in Alianza Lima, which was his formative team. From the 67 that he started playing as a child, as a youngster, he made his professional debut at 66, and he stayed in Alianza Lima even after the World Cup. So he was playing in Alianza Lima. He consolidated as one of the top players of, of the side, and with 21 years, he was part of these friendly matches before the World Cup, and he was wearing the number 10 in the team, nothing less.
Let's discuss some of Peru's other better known players going into this World Cup. Can you talk about the likes of Ramon Mifflin, Roberto Chale, Julio Bailon, Hugo Sotil, and Pedro Leon?
Of course, Paul. All of these players that you have mentioned are attacking players. They were playing the midfield as attacking midfielders, and they could also play as wingers and forwards. Let's go player by player. You mentioned Julio Bailon. He was a tall forward player. He was very strong when it comes to clashing against other defenders, and he had this ability to position himself in the field very well between the two opponent defenders. Defenders of opposite teams struggled a lot when it comes to Julio Bailon. Ramon Mifflin was a midfielder. It was more of a creative player, let's say. He was the one given, Didi gave a lot of instructions to him and a lots of tips to break the lines of the game, to have a lot of vision, not only playing with the forwards, with the attacking midfielders, because, and also in some way playing in between the defenders as a false back, if you might want to call it that way. Roberto Chale was another youngster by that time. He was also 20, 21 years old. He played in Universitario, the classic rival of Alianza Lima, um, one of the big three clubs in Peru. And he was very fast. He was very smart. He knew how to anticipate the rivals. He had a great lecture of the play. He was very quick and very smart. And Pedro Pablo León, his nickname was Perico. He was like a classic European forward, almost a meter and 90 of height, very strong. Also, the defenders struggled with him, and we could see, if we evaluate the squad, that a lot of the players were more of, had an attacking lead, and that was also part of Didi's idea of game style of play.
Few things about these players. Ramon Mifflin and Nicola Fuentes were actually suspended by FIFA for like a year, and they're suspended, and in their suspension it ended around May 8th, so they were ready for the World Cup. And Mifflin actually played with Pele at Santos and New York Cosmos during his career. And as far as Julio Bailon, Didi described him as a 20-year-old Garincha. And Hugo Sotil, also nicknamed El Maestrito, he played at Barcelona with Johan Cruyff in the 70s. And when it comes to Pedro, as I said, Perico Leon, Didi had to deal some disciplinary issues with him. Apparently, Leon would escape from the training camp, and arrive late at times. And the whole squad had to plead with Didi to maintain him and not throw him out. Let's take the opportunity to go through the 22-player man for the World Cup for 1970. At number one, the goalkeeper, we have Luis Rubinos of Sporting Cristal. Number two, defender, right back, we have Eloy Campos of Sporting Cristal. Number three, center back, Orlando de la Torre of Sporting Cristal. Number four, center back, Hector Chumpitas of Universitario. Number five, the left back, Nicolas Fuentes of Universitario. The midfielder, number six, Ramon Mifflin of Sporting Cristal. Number seven, midfielder, Roberto Chale of Universitario. Number eight, on the right wing, Julio Bailon of Alianza Lima. Number nine, striker, Pedro Leon of Alianza Lima. Number 10, striker, Teofilo Cubillas of Alianza Lima. Number 11, left wing and midfield, we have Alberto Gallardo of Sporting Cristal. Number 12, backup goalkeeper, Ruben Correa of Universitario. Number 13, we have Pedro Gonzalez of Universitario. Number 14, you have another defender, center back, Jose Fernandez of Universitario. Number 15, midfielder, Javier Gonzalez of Alianza Lima. Number 16, at left back, we have Felix Salinas of Universitario. Number 17 in midfield, you have Luis Cruzado of Universitario. Number 18, a striker, you have Jose del Castillo of Sporting Cristal. Number 19 striker, you have Eladio Reyes of Juan Orich. Number 20 striker, you have Hugo Sotin of Deportivo Municipal. Number 21, the third goalkeeper, you have Jesus Goizueta of Universitario. And number 22, on the left wing, you have Osvaldo Ramirez of Sport Boys. Just before the World Cup, just before the start of the World Cup, there was an earthquake in Peru, the Ancash earthquake on May 31st, 1970. Can you describe the impact on Peru and the national team, which was away from home at this point?
Mm-hmm. The last day of May in 1970, there was a terrible episode in Peruvian history, a very unfortunate, sad, and until to this day, it's very it's very sad for our people. Ancash, let me put this in context. Ancash is a region on the north of Lima. It's by the Pacific Ocean, but it also got highlands on the center of the country, and where the epicenter of the earthquake was in Yungay, which is a small town in the Andes, in the mountain chain of the highlands of Peru. This was the 31 of May 1970. It was a very deadly earthquake. Unfortunately, there was nothing left of this town called Yungay. The impact was so massive that the debris of this earthquake and this mud slide that came from the mountains even reached the Pacific Ocean. So there were a considerable amount of loss of lives, and also lots of people who disappeared. And this is why on the first match of the World Cup, the Peruvian team showed up with black ribbons on the arm side um, of the shirt, remembering the victims of this natural disaster.
And this first match was on June 2nd at Leon against Bulgaria. So for this match, for Peru, we have Rubinhos, Eloy Campos. He'd be replaced by Javier Gonzalez in the 29th minute. Orlando de la Torre, captain of the side, Chumpitas, Fuentes, Mifflin, Chale, Baylon. He'd be replaced by Sotil in the 46th minute. Leon, Cubias, and Gallardo. So in this match, Bulgaria take a 2-0 lead. The first goal is actually very nice. It's like a free kick combination play where Bonev gets the ball and quickly passes it to Dermendiev, who's running and just puts it past Rubinhos. The second goal is somewhat Rubinhos' fault, as there's a free kick that Hristo Bonev takes, and it just slips from Rubinhos' grasp. However, Peru immediately strike back in the next minute when Leon passed to Gallardo on the left side, and he shot past from a narrow angle to give some hope to Peru. And just a few minutes later, they actually tied the match. Like in the 55th minute, Chumpita scores from a free kick. And Peru, achieved the remontada in the 73rd minute when Cubias does a combination play with Mifflin and scores and advances and scores from just inside the box. While there was tragedy back home, this win at least was like I said, it was a come from behind win and gave the nation some confidence, I would think, at this point.
For sure, I agree with you at 100%, Shahan. But before discussing the impact, let me suggest you to take a little look at the system that Didi offered on that afternoon. It was a shock for the entire country because in the previous friendlies, he actually drew two systems. Remember, guys, that I said that he implemented a 4-5-1 system and then he played with a 4-3-3 system. It was a shock for the journalists and for the Peruvian fans to seeing that Peru, on his debut at the World Cup after 4 years, went to the field with an attacking 100% offensive style of play system. Didi sent to the field Luis Rubiños as a goalkeeper, a line of four defenders with Eloy Campos on the right, Nicolás Fuentes on the left, and two center defenders, Héctor Chumpitaz as a captain, and Orlando Latorre. Only two midfielders, Ramon Mifflin and Roberto Chale, which wasn't a natural recovering midfielder, and four offensive players playing as forwards. Alberto Gallardo, Teófilo Cubillas, Pedro Pablo León, and Julio Bailón. What's curious about this game, that yes, as you said, Bulgaria started winning the game very early at the 13th minute, and Didi saw that his style wasn't working. That's why at the 29th minute of the first half, he takes away Eloy Campos and he sent Javier Gonzalez, which had more of a defensive style to the field. So let me remark that it was a surprise for all that Peru on his debut was doing such a strange way of playing with a style of play completely offensive and non-conservative at all, facing a European team such as Bulgaria.
A few days later, again at Leon, they take on Morocco. And for this match, we have Rubiños, De La Torre, Chumpitas, captain of the side, Fuentes, Mifflin. He replaced by Cruzado in the 56th minute. Chale, Leon, Cubillas, Gallardo. He replaced by Osvaldo Ramirez in the 76th minute. Javier Gonzalez and Sotil. Now, Morocco offered some resistance until the hour, but in like a 10-minute spell, Peru struck three times. So in the 65th minute, Cubillas opened the scoring. 2 minutes later, Cubillas backheeled a pass to Chale at the edge of the box, and he just dribbled and scored. And Cubillas himself scored the third goal in the 75th minute. So this is two matches, two wins, and Peru were already to the second round.
Yeah, I think there couldn't be a better start of the World Cup. You know, having these remontadas you mentioned in the first game against Bulgaria, and having such a brilliant second game against Morocco, nothing less. They were this Yugoslavia coach Bidinic was in charge of Morocco, so a they weren't an easy rival to handle. And Peru again, they had this 4-2-4 system, no conservative at all attacking, and eventually it worked out for the Peruvian interests. Right, we had a 3-0, and it was a contundent win. And as you can imagine, the reaction of the press was very positive. They were praising Didi, they were praising the players. All the flashes were on them, and in some manner they gave a positive reaction to Peru that was still healing from that natural disaster that happened on May.
Yeah. So all that was left was to see who would finish on top in this group. So on June 10th, again at Leon, they faced West Germany. This is a West Germany featuring Beckenbauer, Bertie Vogts, Uwe Siller, Gerd Müller, among others. So for Peru, we have Rubinos, De La Torre, Chumpitas captain of the side, Fuentes, Mifflin, Chale, he'd be replaced by Cruzado in the 72nd minute, Pedro Leon, he'd be replaced by Osvaldo Ramirez in the 56th minute, Cubillas, Gallardo, Javier Gonzalez, and Sotil. So this is a very, very good West German side, and they basically overrun Peru in the first half. So um, Gerd Müller scores a hat trick. In fact, he had scored a hat trick in the previous match as well against Bulgaria. So, and eventually he would end up as top goal scorer of the World Cup with 10 goals. So he scored his goals at 19th, 26th, and the 39th minute. And Peru pulled a goal back just before halftime when Teofilo Cubillas' indirect free kick was deflected by the wall past Sepp Maier. So West Germany wins their group, but Peru were already in the second round anyway. Now, in the quarterfinals, they faced the mighty Brazil. And this obviously is Brazilian 1970 World Cup team. For many, is one of the best teams ever in the history of the World Cup. So this quarterfinal was at Guadalajara on June 14th. And just reading the Brazil lineup, we have Felix in goal of Fluminense, captain beside Carlos Alberto of Santos, Brito of Flamengo, Piazza of Cruzeiro, Marco Antonio Fluminense, Clodoaldo of Santos, Gerson of Sao Paulo. He replaced by Paulo Cesar of Botafogo in the 67th minute, Jairzinho of Botafogo. He'd replaced by Roberto Miranda of Botafogo in the 80th minute, Tosta of Cruzeiro, Pele of Santos, and Rivellino of Corinthians, managed by Mario Zagallo. The names just speak for themselves.
Nothing less.
Yeah. So for Peru, we have Rubinos, Eloy Campos, Chumpitas, Fuentes, Mifflin, Chale, Bailon. He'd replaced by Sotil in the 54th minute. Pedro Leon. He'd replaced by Eladio Reyes in the 61st minute. Cubillas, Gallardo, and Jose Fernandez. Brazil would win this match 4-2. Rivellino opened the scoring in the 11th minute. Tostao scored a second goal in the 15th minute from a very narrow angle. Peru would pull a goal back in the 28th minute through Alberto Gallardo. But once again, in the second half, Brazil would strike again. Tostao scored his second goal in the 52nd minute. And this is before Cubillas would pull a goal back in the 70th minute. But again, Jairzinho rounded out the scoring in the 75th minute. So a relatively comfortable win for Brazil, but that was to be expected at this point against this Brazilian side.
It was. Brazil had a bright and brilliant participation in that World Cup before the quarterfinal match against Peru. You just mentioned all the stars on that constellation of team, and they were managed by Mario Lobo Zagallo, which was without discussion one of the top football trainers in the world by then. But I think that Peru participation against such a powerhouse as Brazil was decent. I don't think that the result 4-2 speaks much or represents from what happened in the field. From what I've heard, from what I've read, and from what I know, is that it was a very tight game, very closed, and that Brazilian players were very smart to outcome the Peruvian players. They didn't let them they didn't let them establish their game, the idea of play that Didi also tried to establish. And there was a lot of critics towards Didi because, in the opposite of the previous games, he didn't line on the first team, on the 11 starter, Hugo Sotil. He was waiting on the bench. He eventually came out to the field replacing Julio Bailon, but that was the critic at the time. Why Bailon started when he wasn't in a very well shape than Hugo Sotil, who was younger and who could give Peru a fresh breath of attacking play. But that was one of the press and one of the public opinion, let's say, disregards about the Peruvian style of play against Brazil. But as you mentioned, Shahan, it was a goodbye for Peru at that World Cup, and I think if we have to evaluate the Peruvian participation, I'm gonna say it was a decent, considering that it was a participation after such a long while with a new coach, with young players, and with a new style of play. And I think that dealing with home issues, such a natural disaster, I think it was a great motivation. And I think that by that time, the Peruvian people were very grateful for what the Peru National Team performance was in Mexico in 1970.
I'm guessing that Peru might have preferred to play England in the quarter-final, which could have happened. But overall, you said this was obviously regarded as a good performance. How is it seen today? Do you think this 1970 World Cup in Peru?
They are actually very positive and good memories. It was Teófilo Cubilla's first World Cup. It was some other players' last participation, such as Julio Bailón, such as Nicolás Fuentes, who were experienced players. And the win against Morocco, the win against Bulgaria remains in the Peruvian people hearts are as good experiences, as swimming against the stream, if you want to call it that way.
So, as far as Didi, what is his legacy in Peruvian football?
Well, Didi, in some way, he tried to establish an attacking mindset, if you want to call it like that, on Peru. Peru used to tend to be very conservative when it comes to playing in international football. They were more focused on defending and trying to have opportunities on the attacking side from shots from the defender to the forwards, and nothing more as a collective game. But Didi, with his experience as a soccer player, I think try to change that mindset, in the Peruvian style of play. As I mentioned again, it was a complete shock for the journalists and the reporters and the Peruvian fans who actually traveled to Mexico to go see Peru, seeing at the debut that Didi played with four defenders, just two midfielders, and four forwards, attackers. So it was something very revolutionary at the time. I think that he knew that he had the options on the bench of players who could have a great performance as wingers, and I think that he took his chances. He knew that he was dealing with an important team such as Bulgaria, who had a brilliant qualifier in Europe as well. And despite being 2 goals down, he managed to give this confidence to his players and um, ending winning the debut game, then having a really great win against Morocco, and well, the unfortunate losses against well, Germany and Brazil at the quarterfinals. But I think he changed this traditional way of Peru to be a team with no how could I say it, with no temper, with no mindset of actually going out to the field and win the game, not just wait and be conservative. So I think it was a positive change.
He left his post right afterwards. Was there a specific reason?
Well, the federation wasn't very happy with his performance, even though some of us could consider that unfair um, by looking at the statistics and knowing that Peru finished the World Cup performance in the quarterfinals, but it was mostly issues with the Peruvian Football Federation. They actually offered him an extension of the contract, but he wasn't satisfied and decided to leave the management of the team.
You've discussed some of the great names in this team. In retrospect, is this considered Peru's greatest team ever?
That's actually a little bit controversial here because some people consider this team as one of the brightest. Some other journalists or key opinion leaders when it comes to soccer consider that it might be the 78 or the 82, and some other consider that the players that qualified for the 2018 Russia World Cup was even better than this. But yeah, we're talking about different contexts. We're talking about, in my opinion, this 1970 team was the best team because they had no players overseas. They, even though they had preparations, they were managed by a new coach with this language barrier. They went through this natural disaster back home. So, in my opinion, this has been the best team when it comes to World Cups.
So, in closing, is this 1970 adventure responsible for setting in motion the belief that Peru could qualify for the World Cups? And as a result, the team qualified for 3 out of the 4 next World Cups from 1970 to 1982.
I think I agree with you, Shahan. I think that, as I mentioned before, it completely changed the mindset, not only of the players, not only of the people with shirts and ties in the National Association of Football, but also of the people. They started to believe. They knew that any challenge that could come towards them, if they worked in team, if they believed in themselves, and if they had discipline and hadn't a clear objective, there was nothing impossible. Like Peru in the 1970 World Cup.
Yes. With that, I would like to thank you for your participation in this interview. As always, feel free to leave questions and comments. You may contact me on my blog, on Twitter, I'm at SP1873, and on Facebook under Soccer Nostalgia. Mr. Paul Whittle can be contacted on Twitter at 1888 letter, and his blog is the 1888 letter. You may also follow the podcast on Spotify, Google, Apple, and Stitcher podcasts, all under Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. Please leave a review, rate, and subscribe if you like the podcast. And Mr. Daniel Arce's contact info on Twitter is also listed. All this information is on the blog and podcast uploads. So thank you, Daniel, and hope to continue these discussions on Peruvian football with the 1978 and the 1982 World Cups in the future. So thank you again.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Shahan, for the opportunity. And yes, as you said, it would be very valuable, very interesting um, to evaluate and to check out the performance of the other Peruvian participations in World Cup. And it's been a pleasure, guys. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us.